Oh, welcome. It's the man with the famous name.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
I'm Lorraine.
Oh, nice to meet you, Lorraine.
Welcome to Hurstville Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Thank you kindly.
Just like you to meet Chris Fields.
Hello, Chris.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
You're one of the elders here, right?
Yeah, I am.
Oh,
Yeah.
lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And Bill, I'll be interviewing you.
Oh, good.
So it's going to be a long interview,
Yes.
2 hours.
Yes.
So we're going to do it in 2 parts.
Oh, right.
But yeah, let's go.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to introduce a man with a very famous name, Bill Gates. Bill Gates, the evangelist. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill, let's deal first with your name, Bill Gates.
At school, it was a horrible name.
Yep.
Because everybody called me Billy Goat. And I come home one day and I said to Mum, I hate my name.
So, in present days when, the name Bill Gates is very famous with Microsoft, how do you encounter when somebody's at the airport calling out Bill Gates or
I
somewhere
have
else?
so much fun with my name.
Do you?
Oh, yes. I remember at the airport I was going to New Zealand from the Sydney airport, and because people confused me with Pastor John Gate and Pastor David Gates, I began to wear a name tag which had my name, Bill Gates, on it. And I'm at the airport and I see 5 beautiful airline hostesses. And they're wearing this uniform, and I'm saying to myself, my son-in-law flies for Etihad Airlines, and I think that's their uniform. So I went up to the airline hostesses and said, excuse me, I said, my son-in-law flies for Etihad Airlines. Is this their uniform? And they said, no, it's Emirates. But then they saw my name, and they said, are you Bill Gates? I said, yes, I am. That's my name. Oh, they said, can we have our photo taken with you, please? And I said, sure. And so I had this beautiful photograph taken, and I have these 5 beautiful airline hostesses around me. Yes, but I said, I'd like a copy of the photo when it's finished. I better give you my business card so that you can mail it to me. And of course, when they got my business card, it said Bill Gates, financial advisor.
So very different, Bill. Okay, so Bill, what I want to know is you're actually born in New Zealand.
Yes.
What part of New Zealand?
A little town called Morrinsville, which was 20 miles east of Hamilton. That's 32 kilometres. About an hour and a half southeast of Auckland.
Okay.
Real cow-cocky country. Surrounded by lots of cows, very few sheep.
So dairies?
Dairy. Yeah.
Dairy cattle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the land there is, the Waikato area is known as having the finest dairy lands in the world. They get tremendous green grass and great quantities of milk from the cows.
So you grew up in what era?
1940 to 1956 was the time I spent in Morrinsville.
On a farm?
It was initially on a farm. Dad was at the war, and he was helping the owner of the farm to milk the cows. But then when he went away to the war, we stayed in this farmhouse for 2 or 3 years. And then when he came back from the war, we moved into the township of Morrinsville.
Okay. So, brothers and sisters?
Yes, I was the oldest of 8 children. Unfortunately, one of them died at birth. I had 4 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay, so tell me about your mother and your father.
My mother, she was a gem. She was a great housekeeper, a wonderful mother, great cook, and of course they struggled with the war years, trying to make ends meet, but we used to have the meat in a wire cage, and it would hang on the south wall of the house, because that was the coldest side of the house. Mm-hmm. And the meat would be delivered by the butcher to the house. You didn't have to go to a butcher shop. Mm. And the milk, that would be delivered by the milkman, and he would pour the milk into a billy. And that's how you got your milk and your meat.
And your bread?
Bread, no, I was the one that had to get the bread. And with a big family, it was nothing for me to get on the push bike, go down to Burmister's bakery, and come home with 7 loaves of bread.
Oh, wow. Not every day.
No, that's always on a Friday to
Oh,
get us
okay.
through the weekend. And sometimes I'd get down to the bakery and they had baked the cakes first. So the cakes come out of the oven, they put on the table and they trim off the edges and put the trimmings down in a box under the table. And I'd turn up to get the bread and they'd say, oh, the bread's still coming, help yourself to the offcuts of cake. So Mum never had any problem getting me to go and get the bread.
Oh, wow. So, Bill, was there any, were your parents spiritual?
I think my mother more so than my father. They never went to church with me. They sent me to church. And initially they sent me to the Baptist church. But after a few years they decided that I was getting too narrow-minded. And so they took me out of the Baptist church and put me into the Presbyterian church.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, Bill, when you moved into town, how big was the town?
It was a town of about 3,500 people.
Oh, reasonable size.
But interestingly enough, in those days, when you didn't have television, we had 2 marching girls teams, we had 2 pipe bands, 1 brass band, and 2 picture theatres and a dance hall.
Wow. So it was quite an active town.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Bill, New Zealand at that period of time, tell me about New Zealand. What was it like when you were growing up in New Zealand, say North Island?
Looking back on it now, I think it was fantastic. I lived in a home that didn't have a car, and so you either walked or you ran or you rode a push bike. And
Horses as well?
no, there were occasionally farmers would come in with a wagon pulled by a Clydesdale, but the cars were taking over, and there was very rarely did you see a horse-drawn wagon, just occasionally. Yeah. You made your own entertainment, and Mum and Dad used to give us 9 pennies on a Saturday morning. 6pence would get us into the picture theatre, and 3pence would buy us an ice cream.
Oh, wow.
And I can still remember you'd get a beautiful variety before the main film came on. You'd have a comedy, you'd have movie tone news, then you'd have a short serial, usually Superman or Batman. And those films, they really thrilled me as a young boy. And I remember I came home from a movie one Saturday afternoon and I climbed up on my dad's shed. I imagined I was Superman and I just jumped off.
Oh,
and
wow.
of course, bang, straight down.
So, Bill, your family members, you were the oldest.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about your family members and
Well-
how well you got on with them.
Oh, I got on extremely well with my family.
Yeah.
But the oldest one under me was my sister, Christine rather, and we had a Queen Carnival in the town, and my boyfriend and I, we decorated my sister's push bike with lots and lots of crepe paper and different colours, and she got first prize, and she always said to me how thrilled she was that we'd decorated her bike. And then underneath her was Fred. He ended up working in the shortwave radio stations, and he had what is called supersonic hearing. And so he was tremendous at his job, and he would be manning these shortwave radio stations on remote coastal areas, listening to the shipping reports. And he actually heard the Britannia leaving the Thames estuary in England en route to New Zealand for the Queen's visit to New Zealand. And his hearing was so good he could hear that ship. And he died, Christine died. Then underneath Fred was a sister by the name of Alison. She was born on the same date as mine, 12th of March, only 7 years later. She's died. Then there was Neville. He worked in the railways. And then there was Selwyn. He's a painter and decorator, and a very good one at that. Neville and Selwyn are still alive. And then the youngest brother was Dennis. He ended up being a barrister and a solicitor, and he's only recently given that away, and
Just retired.
just retired. Yeah.
So, Bill, during this period in New Zealand, This was just after the war?
Yes, when Dad came home,
Yep.
my legal name is Charles William, and I tease people and I say I'm Charles V and William IX. But when Dad came home, we had two Charlies in the house. And so that's when they decided to call me Bill, which is a derivative of my second name, William.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm very interested about your school years. Tell me about school.
Nothing short of a disaster. I was hopeless at school. Playing sports, I remember the guy kicked this basketball to me. I put my foot out to capture the basketball, hit my shoe, bounced off, went through the window of the engineering classroom, and the school teacher's name was McComish. He calls me in, whacks me around the backside 6 times, and it was purely an accident.
How old were you then?
Oh, I must have been about 13 or 14.
Oh, wow.
And they were tough on those days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you continued at school, and you had family siblings there with you at school as well?
Yes, although I don't really remember them being at school with me because for some reason that just is not part of my memory bank. But
But was it a separate primary school to a high school?
well, there was the primary school. My first school was a place called Mungatapara, and it was a tiny little primary school. And then when we moved into the township of Morrinsville, I went to the Morrinsville Primary School. Oh yes, something interesting happened there, Chris. Mm-hmm. At lunchtime, we would pick sides and have a game of rugby. And whoever got this man by the name of Morris Jones, you knew that team would win because Morris Jones was the fastest runner. Mm-hmm. But a new boy arrived at the school. His name was Ray Newsom. Nobody knew anything about him, but on this particular day, Ray Newsom was in our team, Morris Jones was in the other team. We had it all figured out. Morris Jones' team was going to win. Lo and behold, the football gets handed to this Ray Newsom, and he runs the wrong way. He runs to the wrong end of the paddock with Morris Jones in hot pursuit, and then he does a U-turn. He runs the whole length of the football field, scores a try for us, and suddenly we realise here's a guy who can run faster than Morris Jones. And that's a talking point. It was a talking point for years afterwards. And
so there really wasn't any shortage of entertainment,
oh
was
no,
there?
no. And we invented a game called bicycle polo because Morrinsville had a beautiful polo team. These guys would be playing on the horseback, and they would break their sticks. And so on the Sunday we'd go up to the park and we'd find the broken sticks. And then we'd come home and we'd play bicycle polo.
Oh, okay.
And instead of riding horses, we were riding our bikes. And we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, so, okay, you went through schooling.
Yeah.
To what year?
Oh.
Tell me about those years.
Oh, yeah. Because the war hadn't finished all that much earlier, we used to have cadet company. And so we would have marching practice, gun practice, lobbing hand grenades through the goalposts, learning how to do that, because they didn't know if the war was going to break out again. And
this is an actual cadet army?
Yeah, at the school.
Young people?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I got 3/4 of the way through what we called the 5th form, and I suppose that's year 11 over here. And the teacher asked us to draw a German Jack plane for homework. So I went home, spoke to Mum and Dad, and they found a book called The Australian Carpenter, and in that book there was a German Jack plane. So I traced it on lunch paper, then transferred it into my homework book, said to myself, I'll get good marks for this. The next morning, the teacher stands up in front of the whole class and he says, Gates, if I'd wanted a Volkswagen, I'd have asked for a Volkswagen. I had drawn a German Jack plane, like he had asked me to do, yet he called it a Volkswagen.
And what age were you?
15.
Okay.
15 years and about 5 months. And so I left school that week.
Had you been working while you were at school? Were you doing any type of
Yes,
job?
I used to deliver telegrams.
Yep.
groceries. Had a bit of a disaster there. I remember riding this big road. Now, they didn't have gears on the bikes in those days, and they had a big wicker basket in the front loaded with groceries, and I'm cycling and I turn into this driveway and I miss the culvert and I end up in a ditch and over the bike and groceries everywhere. Delivered newspapers. You know, in those days, the quality of the paper was much thicker. Each page was much thicker. So you learned how to spin the newspaper through the air while you're cycling down the footpath, and you made the newspaper spin and land in people's front porches. And they'd hear the thud, and then they'd hear the whistle blow, and they knew to just come to their front porch and there was their newspaper. The last paper I delivered, I gave it an extra fling, and the wind got under it and took it up on the roof of the house. So I didn't have a spare newspaper, so I had to knock on the front door and say to the owner, "Look, I'm sorry," I said, "I've got your newspaper, but it's up on the roof. Can you lend me your ladder?" And so we got it down. Then I worked after school in a mercer's shop.
What's a mercer's shop?
Menswear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I used to do the banking and take the banking along to the bank and clean the place. Yeah, and so after leaving school, I had no qualifications, but I decided I'd walk to the Morrinsville post office and apply for a job.
So you decided to leave school?
Oh yes, I couldn't see any point staying.
But did you consult your parents?
No,
Okay.
I just came home and said, "I've left school."
Okay, Bill, before we go on to you going and finding work, I want to just go back again and ask you a couple of questions. You mentioned it earlier. In your town you had marching bands.
Yep.
So were you involved with any music?
Oh yes, when I was 12 years of age, on my very 12th birthday, the neighbour came down and he spoke to my father and said, "Would I like to learn how to play the bagpipes?" And Dad asked me and I said, "Yeah, I'd like to." And so they took me to a country town called Te Awamutu. And unbeknown to me, there was the South Auckland Pipe Band Championships. And as we arrived, the Auckland Police Pipe Band was marching. And in those days, to be a policeman, you had to have a very large chest size. You had to be over 6 foot tall.
Wow.
And here are these men wearing busbies, which is the big, tall black hat, on top of it being 6 foot already. And they're playing this magnificent music, and I was hooked.
Yeah.
I just loved it. And so I learnt then how to play the bagpipes. And we had 2 pipe bands in Morrinsville, the Morrinsville Caledonian Pipe Band, and I remember we were leading the Anzac Day Parade procession, and we had 6 or 8 pipers, and by the time we got to the end of the street march, I was the only one playing. So I blew a fuse and I said, "That's disgusting." And I joined the other pipe band. And then later on, I came back to the Morrinsville Caledonian Pipe Band and they appointed me their pipe major, which meant that I had the task of trying to develop them and bring them from being C grade to B grade.
So at what age was this?
I would have been 21.
Wow.
And we had a pipe band at school. And when General Freiberg came to inspect the Cadet Corps, our band was to play the music. But there must have been some teachers there who didn't like bagpipes because the prevailing wind is from the west. So they put us on the eastern side of the parade ground. There was a strong wind blowing that day, which meant the music was being blown away from the marching soldiers and the General Freiberg. So they must have done that to appease his spirits or something, but I don't think they heard the music at all.
So Bill, at this time, what sort of communication did you have with your father?
Never a lot of communication with Dad. He was a very quiet man, very powerful man. I've seen Dad walk from the railway station to our home, which would have been 800 metres, with a railway sleeper on each shoulder.
Oh, wow.
And he would bring it home, and then in the weekends, with a handsaw, he'd cut them up into logs. Because in those days, we didn't have washing machines. We didn't have fridges or freezers. For Mum to do the laundry, Dad had to fill the copper with water, stick these lumps of wood
Yep.
underneath and boil the water, and then Mum would wash the clothing in the copper and then pull it out and feed it through a hand winder wringer, and then out on the clothesline. And so, but Dad was very quiet. He never had a lot to say unless you did something wrong. Then you knew about it.
And if you did something wrong, how did he handle it with you?
Oh, very strict.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, that's what's missing today. I look back now and I thank my father for bringing me up strictly. He brought all the kids up strictly. Right was right and wrong was wrong.
But did he show you any affection?
You know, men were inclined to be very macho in those days when it came to demonstrating affection. I know he loved me, but he didn't show much affection. He was too busy providing for a very large family. He was often in the garden. He'd come back from the war, and I think the war affects the men when they come back.
Yeah. But what about your mother? Did she make up?
Very affectionate,
Yeah?
very affectionate.
Yep.
I remember one day, though, I must have got on the wrong side of her, and she belted me round the backside with a yard ruler, which she used for... She was a good seamstress, and she would make dresses and make money for the family. Whenever she hit me, she always broke the ruler, and she'd say to me, when you come back from school, make sure you bring another ruler.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I'd go into Gummers, which was the shop, faithfully get another ruler, bring it home to Mum, and then, of course, she'd break that one too a few days later. Always coming home with a fresh yard ruler. But one day...
Buying a rod for your own back.
But one day I think I must have really upset her, and she grabbed one of these sausages and threw it across at me, and it missed, and we looked at each other and burst out laughing.
Oh, well, that's good. So, Bill, I want to understand one thing. You went to a public school or a private school?
Oh no, I went to a public school, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Within the school at that time, when I went to school, we did the Lord's Prayer.
Right.
So what spiritual things did you do at your school, even in a public school?
Right, well, first of all, on a Monday morning, they recited the 10 Commandments.
Mm.
When we left school, we knew right from wrong. It was not negotiable. You were taught not to lie, not to steal. And so if you ever did anything like that, you got the guilt. But now psychologists say that's bad, you mustn't feel the guilt. Well, that's totally wrong.
Yeah.
They also had a Crusader Club, and that was where we got some Bible instruction. And I remember the Crusader Club took us on a holiday on an island in the Hauraki Gulf, and the island was called Pounui Island. And I remember they put us in a dinghy, and we're rowing this dinghy around an island. Of course, being a country bumpkin, this was all new to me. And I saw this stingray just swimming underneath the boat. I'd never seen a stingray in my life. And then
So
we went,
how far were you from the ocean?
oh, long way.
Oh, were
long.
you?
We're in the centre
Oh, okay.
of the North Island,
Yep,
yeah. Nowhere near any coast.
So your first encounter with the ocean was on one of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm.
So, Bill, okay, let's understand, in this town, very, very active. There's so many different things occurring, from music through to movies, through to sport. So you really had no major free time, did you?
Oh, you were never bored.
No.
I remember in our town, they used to have a thing called a Queen Carnival. This would be a time when the farmers of the country and the townies would get together, and they'd have a variety of things happening. For example, all the shops had to display an object that they never sold. It was called a mystery quiz, and you had to then go and identify in each shop the object that you think they didn't sell. And I just loved that. I actually won the competition. And it's rather interesting as I look back on my life. I used to be an auditor for 3 banks. And this investigative nature that's within me must have come from that Queen Carnival. Yeah.
So tell me about that actual the competition. What did it actually entail, and what did you actually win?
Well, you had to go into each shop.
Yep.
You had a piece of paper and the name of the shop that was in the competition was listed. So you'd go to that shop and then you'd look in their front window to see an object that you knew they didn't sell. And some of them were a little obscure. And then you'd go to the next shop and you'd write your answer on the paper and then you'd hand the paper in. Yeah.
And what was the prize?
Can't remember now. Can't remember.
No, that's fine. Bill, I want to now go to, you're 15 years of age, 15 and some months old, and you're heading to the post office to find a job. This is the area that I find very interesting. So tell us that story.
Well, I'm walking towards the post office and a voice calls out to me, "Hi, Bill." I turn around and it's Charlie Collins, the local bank manager for the Commercial Bank of Australia. I get confused because there's the Commercial Bank and the Commonwealth Bank, and I've worked for both.
Oh, okay.
So it was the Commercial Bank of Australia. He said, "I thought you'd be at school." I said, "No." I said, "I've left school." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" Well, I said, "I'm just going into the post office to apply for a job." And you know what he said? He said, "Bill, you come with me and I'll give you a job." Now this is a bank manager talking to the oldest son of a railway worker who had no qualifications being offered a job in the bank.
It's astonishing, isn't it? But these people would have known you. They
Yes.
would have known.
Yes, they
what
did,
sort of
because I
integrity
used to
you
work
had.
for that Mercer
Yep.
and take his bankings to that bank.
Oh, okay.
So that's how they knew me.
Ah.
They must have decided that I was an honest person.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the first prerequisites.
For a bank, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So-
Yes.
Maybe a bit different now, but... So, Bill, okay, you've now in the banking industry. At what
Right.
age?
15
Wow.
and a half.
Yeah, and what sort of work did you do in the bank?
Well, I was the junior, so I had to light the fire and keep the place warm.
Yeah.
And then eventually they promoted me to being a teller and also a ledger keeper. And the tools of trade were very fascinating in those days. Just 5 things: a hand ledger, a bottle of blue ink, a bottle of red ink, an old-fashioned nib pen, and a Smith & Wesson 45 with real live bullets.
A gun.
Because they didn't have Chubbs and armour guard in those days, you see.
Yeah.
So the Crims knew we were armed. They knew that every 3 months we were training to use those guns, and they knew we'd use them. And so we never ever had a bank hold up.
So, the town that you were in was very safe.
Yeah, I had one murder. I can still remember it, the butcher. He killed his wife. And it was front page news on the New Zealand Herald because there might only be 1 or 2 murders a year.
Yeah.
You know how the Bible says, by beholding we become changed? With the advent of television, you can see murders every day.
Yeah.
Now, some people think that is how you solve your problems today.
So, Bill, now tell me about your working life.
Oh,
How you
fantastic.
progress forward, and also any your sporting and your musical life. in
Right,
Parallel with that.
right. Yeah, sports didn't really have a lot to do with sports apart from what we used to do as kids. Didn't belong to any teams until later. I was transferred from the Morrinsville branch of the Commercial Bank of Australia to Rotorua, a very smelly place.
Oh, because it's
All the
volcanic?
sulphur, you see,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yep.
And the manager had arranged for me to board in a lady's home, and she must have been a customer of the bank. And first time away from home, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and the lady said, "You don't come in here without knocking or asking." And that was such a shock to me.
What age were you?
Oh, about 18 and a half. And so the next morning I packed my bags and left. And I went and stayed at a hotel. And of course hotels were expensive.
Yeah.
But they sorted it out. They put me with another family, and that was fun. That was the first time I ever knew in that Catholic home that there was something called a whoopee cushion. Never heard of it. And of course they give me the cat. And I sit down with the cat. Next minute the whoopee cushion goes off and the cat goes off, and that's my introduction to whoopee cushions.
Okay, so Bill, at this period of time, you're still working for the same bank.
Yeah, and I played in their Rotorua Pipe Band just for the 3 months.
Oh, okay.
And then they transferred me to Patararoo for 3 months and then to Fielding. And in Fielding, the bank manager was a Scotsman by the name of McDougall. That's a good Scottish name, isn't it? And he would pay, or we'd all put in some money and buy a TATS ticket. Now you folks over here will probably know TATS because it's an Australian raffle, not a New Zealand raffle. And I remember one day there was a whoopee came out of the manager's office and we all rushed in to have a look. He'd looked at the results and he'd started at the bottom, the £5 section, moved up to the £10 section, got up to the top prize, which was a 4-bedroom home in Turramurra in Sydney, and we were one number off the winning prize. That's what made him excited.
Oh.
And then they transferred me to the head office, and that was most
Which is where?
interesting. Wellington.
Oh, okay.
In the big city. First time I'd
Yep.
ever lived in a big city. And I remember getting off the train, tied my suitcase to the carrier of the push bike. So there I am, cycling through the main streets of Wellington, through the Victoria Tunnel, up the mountain, and arrive at this house. And a man opens the door and he said, hello. He said, how did you get here? Oh, I said, I biked. Oh, no, he said, don't tell me that. I said, yeah, I said, the bike's out on the front lawn. Yeah, they wouldn't believe, because I never saw any other cyclists there. I mean, Wellington is a windy place and it's a hilly place. But I was so used to biking that was my mode of travel.
So you were quite fit.
Well, I must have been.
Yeah.
I remember when we had holidays, I'd cycle from my parents' home in Morrinsville to my uncle's farm at Tiaraha, 13 miles or 21 kilometres. If visitors came, my cousins came to stay, we'd bike right from there to Tiaraha, climb the 3,500 foot mountain, climb down, go for a swim in the tepid pool, cycle home the 13 miles, have a nice evening meal and crash into bed. So I think I must have been fit. Yeah.
So, Bill, I'm interested in understanding the training that you had. You never had formal training outside the banking system? You were trained within the banking system?
No, trained within the bank. And because I was not a good student, the highest marks I ever got was 48 marks out of 100, and that was a Royal Life-Saving Certificate that I was studying, and I couldn't remember anything. But the interesting thing is later I did some formal training when I came over to Australia.
Okay.
And because it was not based on memory, it was an open book exam,
Yep.
I got over 95 marks out of 100. So it was the fact that I couldn't remember, that was the problem. And I still can't remember. That's why all my sermons here are PowerPoint sermons.
Is it the fact that you get nervous?
No,
or,
no, I just cannot remember.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so Bill, during this time, from the spiritual perspective, tell me about you spiritually at that time.
Well, you see, as I look back now on my time at the Baptist Church, the Presbyterian Church.
What ages were you during
that would have been up until I was 21.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't say that I had a personal relationship with Jesus. I couldn't say that I understood the Bible, because I didn't know anything about topical Bible study. But while I was in Wellington, they asked me to go up to a little country village called Wairoa on the east coast. The accountant was away on holiday for 3 weeks, and I was to relieve him. And Billy Graham was having a landline crusade. And that's when I remember him inviting those who wanted to give their hearts to the Lord Jesus Christ to come down the front. I was in the picture theatre at the Wairoa town, and I was upstairs, in the upstairs section there, and I remember saying to myself, oh, I can't go down amongst all those people and walk up the front. I couldn't do it. And a voice said to me, if you don't go, you might not get a second chance.
Oh, yeah.
And so I bounced out of that chair, went down the stairs, walked right up to the front, and they welcomed me and greeted me and accepted me. But of course, I don't live in Wairoa. I live in Wellington. So when the 3 weeks were up, I go back to Wellington and the whole thing died. There was no follow-up. Yeah.
So the colleagues that you worked with, were they spiritual in any way at all?
No,
No?
no, none of them. None. My mates, we were gamblers. We used to play cards and bet on the horses, and yeah, we just typical secular people.
Yep.
Uh,
So tell me, as you progress, tell me about your working life, how you progressed through, and
Yeah.
what period was this?
Now this would be 59
Okay.
to 61.
Yep.
That's from 1980 to 21.
Yep.
As people deposited money, their deposit slips and the cheques that they were banking would be put into a tube behind the tellers, and I would clean out these various tubes, and I would batch everything and have to balance everything to the cent. In those days there was no tolerance. You had to balance everything to the, well, it was pounds and shillings and pence, not dollars and cents. That came later. And they noticed that I was very good at that, and so they then promoted me to being a teller in the head office.
Oh, okay.
And that was great. I enjoyed that. But I remember that at night time you had to put your money into a big tin and then take it downstairs into the vault and lock it away. But on one occasion, I was the last one to leave. And I just opened my drawers thinking I'd put my cash away in the vault, and I realised I hadn't put the banknotes in the tin. Oh, that was horror of horrors. I didn't know what to do. So I took the banknotes home, put them under my pillow and slept the night, brought them back to work the next morning, put them back in the drawer, and nobody knew to this day that the banknotes never got into the vault.
Quite a considerable sum?
Oh yes.
Yeah?
So, but you know, they then got me to man an agency. That means a bank that I have to open up and look after all the clients, and then we would shut it. And to get there we had to catch a tram and then a bus. And I remember getting there on a Monday morning, and we had to have 2 Gladstone bags. A Gladstone bag's about this big, and it would be about that high. One would be full of money and the other would be empty, because on the Monday the milkman would bring all his takings, and we had to put the milkman's money into this spare Gladstone bag. But on this particular day there was a massive storm went through, and there was a landslide that fell and covered the road, and so the bus could only take us on the way home from Eastbourne to the landslip, and then you had to walk over the landslip and catch the bus on the other side, which would take you back to Wellington. But I always had an armed guard with me, and the guy's name was Ted Burnett. He was an ex-detective sergeant from the Shanghai Police Force. Great big man, lovely man, and a Scotsman at that. And he would walk about 20 paces behind me, and to make sure that I didn't abscond with the money, and to make sure that nobody pinched the money off me. Because as I say, we didn't have chubs, we didn't have armour guard. And on this one occasion, I got on the tram, and there was an Italian conductor, and he insisted that I went inside the tram and didn't stay out in the cubicle. We had an understanding that we were allowed to stand out in the cubicle because of these big, heavy bags. So I have to go inside the tram. It gets to Stuart Dawson's corner and I can't get out because of all the people. So the tram takes off up Willis Street, but Ted Burnett's got off.
Oh.
So I no longer have my escort with me.
You've absconded.
Yeah. And so I get off at the Evening Post building in Willis Street, and I've got to walk carrying these 2 heavy Gladstone bags all the way down Willis Street, hoping that when I get to the head office of the bank that Ted's waiting for me, and sure enough he was.
So, Bill, okay, now you're well and truly into the banking industry.
Yes,
So tell me, from that period right through to when you got married.
yes. Well, I got a message that Dad had fallen out of the railway carriage and that he had fractured his skull and they weren't sure whether he was going to live. So I asked the bank if they would transfer me from the head office in Wellington to the city of Hamilton, which was only 20 miles or 32 kilometres away from Morrinsville. So I could be near Mum. I sort of felt as the oldest son, I had a responsibility to be near her and help her with the rest of the kids. And lo and behold, a new bank opened up called the Waikato Savings Bank. It was 1961. First new bank in the 20th century to open up in New Zealand. And I formed the opinion that it might be nice to be a big fish in a little pond instead of a little fish in a big pond. And so I got a job in the Waikato Savings Bank, and that kept me nice and local and near Mum. They made me their salesperson, and my job was to visit all of the businesses in the Waikato province and try and get them to switch their savings from the post office to the Waikato Savings Bank. And we had one big advantage. We could offer the savers a mortgage where the post office couldn't. And so I was cleaning out all this new business, and finally the Treasury Department of the New Zealand government wrote to the trustees of the bank and said, "Can you ease off, please? You're taking too much money out of the government post office."
Oh, wow. So at what age were you?
That would have
at the
been
time?
21, and then in 22 I got married
Yep.
in the Presbyterian Church to a lovely woman. She loved the bagpipes, and we just had so much in common.
Yep.
She was a school teacher, and she began to teach in the Roman Catholic school. And I was working in the bank, and so we had double incomes. We'd been told we couldn't have any children, so we were doing very well financially. But then one day, the priest came, and he spoke to my wife and I, and the subject of the oldest church came up. And they said that Peter was the first pope. The Catholic Church has popes, so the Catholic Church must be the right church, and why don't we become Roman Catholics? Well, there's a bit more to it than that. First of all, we loved the pageantry, the stained glass windows, the incense, the lilies, the robes of the priests, and the rituals and the liturgy. Loved the whole thing, and loved the reverence of the place. And so we became Roman Catholics by choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But your wife was born a Roman Catholic?
No,
she wasn't?
she was a
She just
she was
taught
a
in the school.
Presbyterian.
Oh, okay.
all her life. And we both, after our marriage, we both converted to the Roman
Yep.
Catholicism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Bill, what was the age of your youngest sibling at that time?
So I would have been 22. Dennis would be all of 12 years younger, so he would have only been 10.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So still
yeah.
very young family.
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Okay, so now you're married, you're attending the Catholic church.
Yeah.
Still in the banking industry.
Still in the bank, yep.
Yep.
And then a new bank opened up on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand called the Bay of Plenty Savings Bank.
Oh, okay.
And I was chosen to go over and help the general manager for the first 2 weeks in getting the new business, and I would look after the ledgers and be the teller. And after 2 weeks, the general manager said to me, "Bill, the South Canterbury Savings Bank, which is down in the South Island, had advertised for a general manager, and they had no replies." And he said, "Oh, Bill," he said, "you should apply." So I applied, and this time they had 6 replies. They got rid of 3, and then they flew me down to Timaru for an interview, and to cut a long story short, I was chosen to be the number 2 IC to a local man who they made the general manager. But my job was to design the stationery, train the staff, try and bring in new business, and I had a fabulous time down there. And that's where the sports became a big factor
Okay.
in Timaru.
Yep.
I began to play outdoor bowls. This was a game that Dad played. And the fabulous times I had on the bowling green. Oh, down on the South Island, the grass is different. In the Waikato, where Morrinsville Township is, the grass is green and the cows love it and they produce good milk. But down in South Canterbury, the grass is short, it's brown, very much like you'd see out back in summer here in Australia. But of course, they would mow it very short. And when you played bowls, you had to push these bowls way, way out on a huge arc. Not like playing marbles where you might just have a little arc. These were wide arcs.
So this is what they call lawn bowls?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
And they spent the first 3 years as a junior, and then the next 2 years as an intermediate, and then you became a senior. I won the singles championship in the third year, I think it was. That meant that I could meet all the champion bowlers of all the other clubs in South Canterbury, and I beat them and became what is called the champion of champions. Now, you have to remember, I'm still a junior, I haven't gone through intermediate, I haven't gone through senior, and they chose me for the South Canterbury rep team.
So there's a serious protocol that you normally would have to
Yeah,
follow.
but they put me into the representative team, and that was incredible. Yeah.
So you got to, because you must have been pretty good.
I heard another bowler say to a captain of the club, "Oh, get Bill in your team, he'll plonk them in all day long." That was his
Okay.
comment. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So you were vigorously involved in that sport.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah? And going to the Catholic Church every
Yes,
Sunday?
until they did something.
Ah,
The Catholic Church in Timaru is beautiful. I want to see the stained glass windows. They're insured for over $1 million. Absolutely magnificent. But in Rome they had a meeting called Vatican II, and they said that if you ate meat last Friday, you're a sinner, but if you eat meat next Friday, you're not a sinner. Well, that was too much for me and my wife. We said there's something terribly wrong, and we left. And so we were in no man's land from that point.
over that issue.
Yeah, over that issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were taking things quite seriously then?
Yes, but still biblically very ignorant.
Yeah?
Yeah, very ignorant.
All right, so tell me how you progressed forward spiritually from there.
Well, remember I told you earlier on that we were told we couldn't have any children.
Yep.
I go home from the bank in Timaru one day and my wife says, "Hi, Dad." And I looked at her. She said, "Yes, we're going to have a baby." I said, "That's amazing." I said, "I thought we couldn't have any." And sure enough, our oldest daughter arrived and her name was Janice. And suddenly, we didn't want her growing up as a stranger to all the cousins and uncles and aunties who were all up in the North Island.
Yep.
There we are down in the South Island. We'd said, well, we can't have kids, so any time we want to go to the North Island, we'll just jump on a plane and fly up and see the rallies and go back.
Can't drive them?
No, because of Cook Strait, you see,
Oh,
separating
okay.
the North Island from
Yep.
the South.
Yep.
So one of my jobs at the South Canterbury Savings Bank was to audit the banks and make sure that no money was missing. And there was a little country town called Geraldine, beautiful town, voted the prettiest town in New Zealand. It nestled under the foothills to the Southern Alps, and I could audit that bank in an hour and a half. So I said to myself, I cannot guarantee that I can stay in banking because all of these new banks were like the Bendigo Bank,
Yep.
community banks. They're parochial, and you have to resign from one and apply to join another. So I said to myself, I think I'll try and get a truck driver's license. And so I asked the bank manager who had a truck in the town, and he said, the local milkman. So I approached the milkman and I said, look, I'd like to get a truck driver's license. Can you help me, please, with the use of your truck? And can you train me? He said, I can do better than that. He said, I'll give you access to my bus. He said, I drive the bus between the Orari railway station and Geraldine. He said, and if you get your bus driver's license, you'll automatically get your truck driver's license.
So this is a reasonable sized bus?
Oh yeah, passenger one.
Yep.
So I got my licence, and to this day, I've never driven a bus or a truck since. And that's because I applied to the Wellington Savings Bank, which was at the bottom of the North Island, for a job, and they gave me a job in the Wellington Savings Bank, starting at the bottom of the ladder. But within 18 months, they'd appointed me to be the regional manager of their bank. I had 5 banks under my control and 65 staff to care for. And it was in this city of Wellington that God impacted my life in a big way. And I remember going and preaching at Grafton just recently, and a man said to me, "By the way, Bill," he said, "what did you do for a living?" And I told him about being this regional manager and having 65 staff to care for. And he replied and he said, "From day one, I had 6,000 under me." I said, "Wow, that's a heavy responsibility." I said, "What did you do for a living?" He said, "I mowed the lawns at the local cemetery." I thought that was priceless.
I love it. So, Bill, let's go on. You're married, you've got a child.
Yes.
No longer going to church.
Right. So we're in no man's land, and then they put me out. They put me in a flat above one of the branches of the bank, and a terrible storm came through. We had this blizzard coming up from Antarctica, which reached Wellington at the same time as a tropical storm came down from the top of the North Island. It met over Cook Strait, and we had hurricane force winds of 168 miles per hour. And it sank a ship, a 10,000-ton ship called the Wahine, which was a passenger liner. It was the ferry between Wellington and Christchurch.
Okay.
And so on that morning, where I went down from our flat upstairs to the bank, and the whole bank was covered in leaves. The wind was so strong it had forced the leaves from outside of the bank under the front door and inside, and I had to naturally sweep all those leaves up. But that gives you an idea of how strong the wind was. And then one day my wife said to me, "Bill, I think I'll go to that church around the corner." And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, "Isn't that the Seventh-day Adventist church?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "You don't want to go near that nut house."
But she knew about them? She knew about Seventh-day Adventists?
I don't think so.
No?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay.
No. So I said, "You don't want to go there, they go to church on Saturday." So that's a classic example of blind prejudice.
Yeah.
So she went. I carried on playing bowls.
Every Saturday?
Every Saturday I'd be out there playing bowls, yeah. Wondering why I couldn't play like I played in the South Island, but of course the answer was that the greens were different.
Oh, okay.
The grass was different.
Yep.
The arcs were no longer wide, they were narrow, and it took me a long time to adjust to that. Yeah. And so she got a phone call one day from a very dear friend, and this dear friend said, "Gail, can you come over and meet this lady who's a Seventh-day Adventist?" So my wife goes over, meets the Adventist lady, who, by the way, used to be a bobby, a police lady in the London police force. And my wife simply said to her, "Can you please tell me about Seventh-day Adventists?" And that led to Bible studies with the pastor Bob Trude, and it led to her being baptised. But I still wasn't interested.
You hadn't gone to the church, even for a baptism?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yep. Still prejudiced?
Still very prejudiced. I'd given up religion altogether.
Yeah. That Billy Graham thing had disappeared
No, it
altogether?
completely well, it disappeared about a week or two after I'd made the commitment.
Yep.
Simply because there was no follow-up, I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But so that was how she became a Seventh-day Adventist, and she's still a Seventh-day Adventist and a good one to this day.
Yep.
At a later date, she left a book on the table called God's Channel of Truth. is at the Watchtower, written by Pastor Bruce Price, who I didn't know.
Okay. From Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she said, if you read that book, you'll be able to ask the Jehovah Witnesses some very interesting questions when they come to our front door.
And did they come often?
Yes.
They did.
Yeah. But she didn't tell me that in that book was Seventh-day Adventist teachings.
Yeah.
And my interest began to be aroused as I read it, to the point where she must have noted that and then told the pastor, and he rings me up and he says, Bill, would you like to do topical Bible studies with me? And I said yes. And the very first study we did was Daniel chapter 2 in the Old Testament.
And what age were you?
30 years old.
Yep.
And that study electrified me. Because nobody in the Baptist church or the Presbyterian church or the Catholic church had ever told me that the future of the world is portrayed in that one chapter. I never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw the end result of that chapter, and that is the rock, and the rock represents Jesus Christ coming back the second time to take the saints back to heaven. That electrified me, and I've been electrified ever since.
Okay, Bill, let's just close this session with a prayer.
Fine.
Our loving Father, we know the most powerful thing any of us can do is to give our personal testimony. We ask, Lord, that Bill's testimony will be a blessing to anybody that hears it and sees it, and we ask for your blessing on all that we do, say and think. In your wonderful name. Amen.